So with the trilogue due to conclude in a week's time, I'm delighted to be joined by Simon Coveney, who's going to give us a perspective around the politics that are driving some of the decisions that we're seeing coming out of Europe. Simon, thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Maybe we just kick it off. Can you give people a sense of the politics behind the move, particularly in the Parliament, from 1,000 employees to 1,750 employees, and the perception that the EPP is now moving towards the right? Can you tell us what's kind of driving that?
Yeah, well, certainly I'm not going to speak up for the far right, but what I will say is that the politics of Europe has changed. The world has changed significantly in the last couple of years. The pressure on the European Commission, but also on governments and political parties across the European Union to focus on areas that perhaps weren't a priority a number of years ago, but certainly are now. And what I mean by that is, really the extraordinary increase in focus on competitiveness, trying to drive down cost, trying to find a way to light a fire under Europe's economy, so that we can pay for the kind of economic growth that Europeans expect. The increased expenditure that we're going to see on security and defence. And I think really to talk about the omnibus pieces of legislation that are coming through, and we're talking about one today, but there's actually a whole series of them, whether it's linked to the common agricultural policy, whether it's linked to chemicals, whether it's linked to financial services, whether it's linked to energy. We're going to see a whole raft of these efforts by the institutions of the European Union to make Europe a place that is seen to be, but also is, more competitive in terms of driving down costs, particularly for small businesses, to reduce bureaucracy, to reduce red tape and paperwork. And that, in some ways, those statements almost sound like political cliches, but actually the European Union is making a big effort right now to try to actually focus differently. Up until a number of years ago, the European Commission really was a regulator that actually set the rules and then looked to actually implement them through reporting obligations and collection of data, and then follow up to make sure that you had a level playing field across the single market. That resulted in the Commission effectively taking lots of governments to court, including Ireland, taking legal cases and so on. I think the European Commission's role now, yes, is as a regulator, but also as, I think that they see themselves now as a facilitator of growth and innovation. I think that is a necessary change, I have to say, and it's what's driving the debate in the European Parliament at the moment, and it'll be what will drive the discussion across the three institutions in the trialogue as well.
So you mentioned about the simplification, and obviously this is just a starting point, and of course it's going to wash across lots of different regulation. One of the common concerns from business is consistency and certainty in that. Is it fair to say that, notwithstanding the electoral cycles we're going through, given the new reprioritisation, that business can expect this to stick and to stay for at least the next 5 or so years?
I think so. I think there's going to be an agenda for the lifetime of this Commission around competitiveness, job creation, security, resilience, what's called strategic autonomy in terms of how the European Union sees the world. So in other words, we need to be able to look after ourselves. We'll see a very proactive acceleration of trying to secure trade deals with other parts of the world. I mean, Europe will probably have a new trade deal with the UAE, for example, at some point in the next 6 months. We'll look to put an agreement in place with Mercosur, which is somewhat controversial in Ireland, from a beef perspective. Also, some form of trade arrangement with India, probably not a full trade deal, but certainly improved trade facilitation. And all of this is happening because the world is changing around us. The transatlantic partnership that many of us have taken for granted all of our lives is now being called into question. And so this sense that Europe has to stand on its own 2 feet and has to become more robust, more defensive in some ways, but also to create its own growth story.
And speaking of targets, it's interesting that Ireland is behind, as we all know, and paper doesn't refuse ink. We see the headlines around the 8 billion to 20 billion potential in fines. Do you think, given the refocusing of Europe, that'll be reimagined in terms of progress as opposed to more carrot and less stick?
Well, I mean, I can only give you my opinion here. I find it hard to believe that Ireland is going to be fined billions of euros if we don't meet targets, as long as we can show that we are moving in the right direction and that we can get to targets of 2035 and 2040. But I think it'll be a little bit like the negotiation of the extension of the derogation for farmers. I think the Commission will be demanding, but will want to work with us. And I think the idea that the European Commission is going to build a relationship that can help the necessary climate change to happen in Ireland, or response to climate change can happen in Ireland by slapping fines of billions of euros on Ireland. In the new politics of Europe, I think that is unlikely. But Ireland will need to show that we are making progress and taking those targets seriously. Ireland has a lot to do over the next 5 or 6 years. Climate change is an important element of that, but it's not the only one. And I think the Commission will work with us on that.
Simon, great to talk to you today. Really appreciate the conversation and all the insights. Thank you.
Thank you. Anytime.